Well, happy people, it's another week, another episode of Trauma 97, aka X-Men 97, and I have a lot of thoughts on today's episode, and actually this time there are mostly positive thoughts. Now this show, I said last time, has been a roller coaster of ups and downs. The last episode I wasn't really into, but this episode kind of brought it all back. Even then, I can see the criticisms people would have with it, but I overall really enjoyed this episode and found a lot to sift through, and there is a lot in this episode. This is probably the most stuffed episode that we've gotten so far, and there's a lot to talk about with that, not just in terms of what the episode is doing, but just how this series is structured and all that they're trying to achieve at once. So after the last episode, Life Death was ending up just being a filler, just to wrap up a couple plot lines. A lot of it was very rushed. Some of it was rushed. Other parts of it I thought carried on too long, and I was just kind of felt like the wind was taken out of me a bit because of how shocking episode 5 was, and I just wanted to get back to that plot line with the Genosha massacre and all of that. So, very pleased, obviously, when we start this episode, we are right back there to the aftermath of all of that, and we get to see Gambit's funeral, and Gambit is given quite the funeral. Nightcrawler is presiding and talking about him. He's got a picture. The picture of Gambit at his funeral is like the pose that you would see on an action figure, though, and somebody said, is that his work picture or something? It was kind of weird. But at his funeral, you get to see the Easter eggs of who's there: Belladonna and his brother Bobby from the show version of his history. Interestingly enough, the show version of Gambit's history, Belladonna was his crazy ex-girlfriend who wanted to force him to marry her. In the comics, Belladonna was his ex-wife, and they actually did care about each other, and she wasn't crazy, and his brother's name was Henry, who was killed there. Anyway, some lore, but I feel like they're kind of mixing the show's lore with the comics lore again a bit there. We see another character there who has dark brown hair and white, and it looks like Rogue. She even has green eyes, but it's not Rogue, because Rogue isn't actually there, because as we're going to find out, Rogue is having a hard time processing her grief. She cannot accept that Gambit is dead. But I'm like, who is this other character there? And it hasn't been explained yet. Is this Rogue from another universe? I don't understand. I will say one thing about Gambit's portrayal in this show, though, that kind of bothers me. It not even really bothers me, it's just there, but they have made Gambit such a saint in this show. Like, they don't explore any of his womanizing that was implied in the original series. They made it so he's not responsible for any mutant massacre. They made it so he was protecting everyone from the mutant massacre, and he saved everyone. He doesn't have any weird affairs in his background. He's not cheating on anyone. He's not getting overly angry. He's only ever been self-sacrificing and skeptical for the right reasons. And I just think that that's interesting because, Gambit has many reasons in the comics for why he doesn't feel good about himself and why he doesn't deserve redemption. He has a whole lot of skeletons in his closet. I just think it's interesting that this version of the character, they've just made him such a saint compared to everyone else. There is a great moment, though, of Rogue finally acknowledging that Remy is a good man, and that she calls him her man, and I'm like, okay, you finally got to that point. If only he was here to see it. But hopefully that'll lead to some good things down the line. But anyway, we get into the episode, and everyone is grieving Gambit, and Rogue, like I said, is dealing with it in her own way, where she's constantly lashing out in anger, and she's going after Trask. She's just mowing down the government, and she comes into contact with Captain America because of that. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, to get into what I really liked about this episode is we don't get a lot from Rogue, but what we do get is finally starting to feel in character for her. That was my problem with the whole Magneto thing, is whenever they do Rogue with Magneto, she does not feel in character. Luckily, Magneto barely comes up in this episode at all in terms of Rogue. It's only mentioned by Kurt once, and I was like, don't bring that up. But Rogue just goes right back to mourning Remy after that. She's only talking about Gambit really throughout this episode. And so with that, we can finally get some more in-character Rogue stuff. We get a demonstration of her power, which she is incredibly powerful just by her strength alone that she stole from Carol Danvers. Think of that scene in Endgame where Carol Danvers destroyed the entire Thanos ship. That is how powerful Rogue can be. And so we see her going on this rampage that I really liked, and it led to two of my favorite moments, which I do really like seeing Nightcrawler come to comfort her because he is her adopted brother. And we rarely see that in the comics of them really utilizing that relationship. They've done it more so in the cartoons like X-Men Evolution, but I really like seeing the sister-brother bond between Nightcrawler and Rogue. And going on, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with this, but I'm just sticking to the Rogue stuff right now. But we get to see her snap a little bit at the end, or more than once in this episode, where she uses her touch ability finally against Gyrick, and it's implied that she might have taken even more of his anger from that. But, you know, Rogue, after being just so scared about using her touch power, is just, you know, going all out and trying to get revenge on Remy, and she does not know how to deal with her emotions, and it leads to a moment later on where we get to see some of her dark side come out, where she pretty much murders Trask, and he doesn't actually die, as we'll talk about in a minute, but she was more than willing to kill him right there, and says that she has nothing left after Remy's death. And to get that dark side of her, I really liked it, because if anything is going to make Rogue go crazy, it's going to be Gambit's death. And you know, the comic, she gets so upset she can't even let him die. But anyway, to see that dark side finally come out and see her going to this place, she was a part of Mystique's Brotherhood, so it all makes sense. So I find that very interesting. I just wish we got more of her in this form, you know, separated from the bad love triangle stuff that I wish they never did. I'll hold back on complaining about it this time, you guys. We'll save it for the series review. Luckily, it seems that all that stuff is done now. But in the series review, I will break it down. But I wish we got more of this kind of Rogue throughout the entire season, where she can just be herself, does not have to be tied to an awful love triangle that I still think tainted her character. But anyway, but there is still a lot more to go over. The main characters for this episode, and we are just bouncing back and forth from characters and characters throughout this entire thing. But we've got Cyclops and Jean finally reconciling a bit after their conflict in episode 5 and giving each other some understanding. But as Scott notes, that there is still a lot of damage that has been done to their relationship because of the whole clone thing. We get some touching moments of Scott mourning Madeline when they find she's not alive. A great moment of them finding that Emma Frost is alive, which is taken directly from the comics, where she goes into her diamond form, a second mutation manifests, and that is how she survives. And I hope that they are setting that up so that we have more Emma Frost in the future. I can very well see that this series ends, or at some point, with Jean becoming the Phoenix again, because they keep mentioning the Phoenix. They mention it in every episode that Jean is featured in, and they keep bringing it up. I think at one point Jean is going to become the Phoenix again to defeat whatever threat they have to deal with, and that maybe she and Scott agree to take some time apart so that Jean can figure herself out. And I don't know if maybe then they'll do a little bit of the Emma Scott relationship from the comics. We'll see, but I think that that's where this is going. I don't think that they're going to make Scott and Jean hate each other. They've already reconciled, but I think that they are going to take some time apart. But we get to see that basically the dark side of characters comes out in these episodes. We see Beast starting to go off the edge a little bit, and basically just the relationships between humans and mutants are reaching a tipping point. It looks like there's going to be a war, but this is all being orchestrated by Sinister and Bastion, who is revealed in this episode. And we already knew that, or at least the diehard nerds like I knew that, because it was leaked a long time ago that Bastion was the main villain. And so this all building up, this is all the build up to the big finale that we're going to get to. But you know, what I've said about this show is that everything that, you know, I can't predict anything, and so far we haven't been able to predict anything, but this episode we started to see some of our predictions come true. There's a mention that Valerie Cooper, who everybody thinks is Mystique, hasn't been found yet after the massacre, and I'm like, yeah, she's Mystique. If they're not showing her yet, she's Mystique. So that's a thing. Magneto is alive. I don't think that that's a big spoiler, because we all called it. He's revealed at the end. It looks like he's going to be transformed into a human sentinel or something. And so that is going to be interesting. But they already spoiled that in the trailer. So these sorts of predictions that we've had are finally coming true, and that might mean that we're finally getting to a point where we're understanding what they're doing with the show a bit more. But now that gets me to the criticism that has been with the show from the beginning, is that they're really struggling with pacing, with balancing out characters and character beats and all of that. Cable comes in at the end of this episode, and it's a huge moment. It should be a huge moment of Cyclops realizing that he's his son, and he does realize that, but they kind of brush it off. It isn't given a lot of time. And, we still, Bishop was teased as being like a main character in this show. He was advertised that way, and I don't really care for Bishop, but I understand the people who have complained and said, like, Bishop has been a non-character in the show. He's barely been in it. Why did they even advertise that? Wolverine! We're 7 episodes in, and Wolverine has done nothing but have the gruff line here and there, and I can understand the thought process behind it, because it's like Wolverine's been given so much of the spotlight over the years that it's okay if he takes a back seat every once in a while, but now it's getting to a point where it's like, why are you guys going to do anything with him at all? I mean, they've tried to give focus to each character, but he's fallen by the wayside. And I think it's interesting that the showrunner, though, who was fired and came back online, has been very active, said that he really hates the 10-season format. I mean, not the 10-season, the 10-episode format. He wishes we could go back to 22 episodes. And that is what I think is really going on with this show, is that they had such a bold story that they wanted to go with so many moving parts, but that they are just struggling with getting it out in 10 episodes. Like, this episode is just jam-packed with so much stuff. And you just feel like a lot of this stuff just needed to give more room to breathe. Like, Rogue, I finally like what they're doing with her in terms of this grief and this anger coming out, but even that doesn't get a lot of time, because we have to go to the next thing. We have to go to Roberto revealing himself as a mutant, and we still haven't seen him use his powers yet. We have to get to that still. And so there's just so many characters and so many moving parts. It does make me question, why don't we have 22 episode seasons anymore? That's just strange to me, especially since it's got a 2-season order. Why didn't you just make it one long season? I would like to say one more thing, though. Captain America appears in this episode, and I was really excited for that, but he only appears for like 30 seconds, and it's for him to, represent more of the mutant versus humans relations that are just breaking down, because he sides with his government. He feels like he can't go out and do anything because of the bad optics, and that's what the theme of this episode is really about, optics. And people, who these characters are. Sunspot's Roberto's mother is not upset with him being a mutant. She's upset about how it makes the family look. Trish is talking to Beast about the optics of the situation, and people don't want to help each other. Like, the president doesn't want to help because of the optics. So that's the theme of this episode: what people will do because of optics. But to have Captain America be like the government's lapdog and not be willing to help the characters because of this, like, that is wrong. And somebody said it, and this post went viral online, is that they hate it when the Avengers sometimes come in to the X-Men storylines, that they make the Avengers look bad to make the X-Men look better. It's like Captain America has never been the government's lapdog. First Avenger, Winter Soldier, Civil War, even in the MCU, we see that even in the comic book version of Civil War, he goes against the government. He is all about breaking the rules in order to do the right thing. He would not be just sitting there, worried about the bad optics and not be willing to help out. So I didn't like that use of Captain America here, but it shows just like, because there's a lot that I liked about this episode, like Emma Frost, what they did with Rogue, Nightcrawler, Gambit, his funeral, the Jean and Scott stuff that is developing, where they're going with the villains and the big final blowout of the show, the animation, the dark stuff they're getting into. But it's like such an uneven show where the highs will be high, but then the lows will be really low, and like you'll have a character that's done really well, a character that's not done really well, an emotional moment that seems like it's really building up, and then the payoff doesn't really get there. So it's going to be, once again, very interesting to explore once I do the series review. It definitely is worth checking out if you are an X-Men fan, but is it the perfect rendition of the X-Men? I would not say so. I still think that the comics so far are the perfect rendition of the X-Men, and that more people should read those and take notes on that. But this is an interesting experiment to see it play out on screen and how much that at least this creative team can do with these characters in such little time. But what do you guys think of this episode? Let me know in the comments below. Are you enjoying the series? Are you not enjoying the series? Let me know. My short film is releasing on Friday, and you guys have already been really great in giving your likes to it and putting comments under it. Thank you guys so much for helping me out with it, and I'll see you guys next time.